Yeah, so good morning to you, though it's nearly night here. And thank you very much, Professor Acharya and Professor Ashwini, for giving me the opportunity to participate in this event. So I'm going to describe, just as was suggested, some of the things, how I got into this whole business of studying Krishnamurti and getting involved with Krishnamurti education. I have it in the form of a slideshow here. So like anybody, I think like many of the speakers who have already spoken here, my encounter happened purely by chance, Shirali speaking in a bookshop. And I was immediately attracted by the transparent simplicity of writing, the extraordinarily simple way in which he put across whatever he wanted to say, with no jargon, no quotations, no, no authorities being claimed. And also those extraordinarily sensitive, exquisite, you can say, depictions of landscapes and of nature that resonated with me very strongly. Well, one way or the other, I ended up joining Rishi Valley as a teacher in 1983, and I have been with the KFI schools ever since. So what I'm going to explain now is what is it about Krishnamurti's approach to education that particularly attracted me. First of all, let's look around the world. We see these extraordinary multiplicity of crises, the environment breaking down with an uncertain future, particularly for the younger generation, a tremendous pandemic, you can say, of authoritarian governments all over the world, equally a pandemic of fundamentalism and nationalism, and this extraordinary divide happening between the rich and the poor, particularly, say, in countries, some countries. And then consumerism, which is, of course, linked with the environmental crisis. The whole entertainment industry, people getting lost in more and more and more in entertainment. And because they are getting more and more sophisticated also. And then echo chambers, which are a phenomenon which has really multiplied in recent times because of the internet. People getting locked into their own opinion circles. And then this new thing called fake news, which is enabled by artificial intelligence. So we have really a tremendous multiplicity of crises going on. And alongside that, you also have this mind-boggling miracles of science. Right now, you have this vehicle which has been put down on Mars. Look at the amazing technology which lies behind that and the technology behind artificial intelligence. So you ask this question, how is it possible that you can have such extraordinary happenings among us coexisting with such a primitive mindset? So I'm going to quote here something from Martin Luther King, which says here, the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason but with no morals. Now, you may wonder why I'm quoting Martin Luther King here, but I think there's a close parallel between what he's saying and some of the things that Krishnamurti says, though, of course, it's put in very different language. So when you look at all this, you ask, how do we look at this? Are we going to look deeply into the problems and ask where they come from, look into their very bases? Or do we examine only symptoms and try to only make small modifications in them, be content with patchwork reform, which really has been the way for centuries? We approach things from the outside. Or as the next slide shows, our traditional response has completely been in the province of social engineering, which means that we try to fix problems through forces from some other direction. Everything is fixed by putting an alternate force, trying to engineer things in a particular direction. You have laws which try to control wrong behavior. You have incentives by which you try to encourage certain kinds of behavior. You have policing, the whole philosophy of reward and punishment. And reward and punishment essentially deals only with the outer of human beings. You never touch the core. You're always treating the behavior end of a person. And this whole way of thinking, which is there endemic in our society itself, has come into our schooling systems. So exactly the same approach is followed everywhere. So Now look in contrast at this quote from David Bohm, a very powerful quote. You know, David Bohm, close associate of J. Krishnamurti. We are faced with a breakdown of general social order and human values that threatens stability throughout the world. Existing knowledge cannot meet this challenge. Something much deeper is needed, a completely new approach. I am suggesting that the very means by which we try to solve our problems is the problem. Now, this is a very radical quote. And of course, Krishnamurti has made many such statements. And if he is starting to doubt the very approach that you have, the very means by which we try to solve problems, then it puts us into an almost impossible situation. How are we possibly going to tackle a problem when our very approach itself is leading to more problems? And now I go on from now here to what Krishnamurti says. Let's look at the traditional aims of education. What are they? Build up your knowledge, base of knowledge, get to know the world, build up your expertise in a variety of subjects, in a variety of disciplines, hone your skills, perfect them to the greatest extent possible, skills such as reading, writing, reasoning, computing, public speaking, and of course, all the skills connected with sports and music. And then also social, cultural, and intellectual development, the development of your talent to the highest capacities possible. And then most of all, the last line is a very key line in this, the traditional aim of education, preparing for professional life and preparing for a career. In fact, today, I think I would not be wrong to say that for most children, most parents going to school, essentially they see school as a stepping stone into professional life, which means that the main thing that they're going to be looking for is to maximize what they get from that whole experience, maximize their competitive edge, their ability to race ahead of everyone else. That's the way it has been organized. And these seem innocent enough. Who would argue against getting more knowledge and more skills and learning, reading, writing, and all? They look innocent. But the difficulty is that we are not so simple beings, such simple beings. We are complicated. We have a desire for security. We have the urge to power, to dominate, to conquer, to possess. We fall in love with our own skills, that narcissistic aspect of ourselves. We fall in love with our knowledge. These things give us a sense of great power. And of course, when you have power, there's devastation of both man and nature. And I think that's exactly what we see happening all across the world. Now, if this is the situation across the world in our education system, what is the alternate? So what does Krishnamurti tell us? He's telling us, first of all, that the ignorant man is not the unlearned, but he who does not know himself. Now, he who does not know himself, that statement sounds very simple and bald, just a few words, but there's a tremendous amount contained in that little sentence. Understanding comes only through self-knowledge, which is the awareness of one's total psychological process. Thus, education, in the true sense, is the understanding of oneself. Conflict results from wrong relationship with people, with things, and with ideas. And until we understand that relationship and alter it, acquiring skills can only lead to chaos and destruction. And then he points out that education has overemphasized technique. And in overemphasizing technique, we destroy man. Because technique without self-understanding makes you a ruthless person. That's exactly what Martin Luther King also was pointing out. Life is pain and joy, beauty, ugliness, love. And when we understand it as a whole, that understanding creates its own technique. So you'll notice how Krishnamurti is turning everything upside down. Is it possible to have an education system in which technique does not form the center of the education system? Technique comes about by itself when these other components are there, when you start to experience life as a whole, and when there is self-understanding. So can there be an education system which is like that? That is what Krishnamurti is asking. And that is what really attracted me to this whole question. And he says, a school is a place where one learns the proper place of knowledge, which means not only the relevance of knowledge where it is relevant, but also the irrelevance of knowledge in places where it is not relevant. It's a place where one learns the importance of relationship, which is not based on attachment, where one learns to observe the world and oneself. That means the observation has been made the core of education, which means one has to learn the art of listening and looking and learning. This is something which Krishnamurti has emphasized very greatly, and it puts the challenge on us. Can we devise an education system whose core is observation, whose core is learning how to listen, how to look, and how to learn? Now, how does one actually take this forward into a Krishnamurti school? So here are some practices which are well known in the Krishnamurti schools. Those who are not familiar with the Krishnamurti schools may not know of them. For example, we have the culture classes, which are right through the curriculum from the lowermost class to the uppermost, highermost, where we look at ourselves, we look at life, we talk. The whole focus is on discussion and examination, looking at ourselves. There's no curriculum as such, but the whole, you can say the curriculum is attention. The curriculum is observation. Then class 11 in particular has a course, which is like a course called contemporary studies or general studies, in which rather than looking just inwards, you're also looking outwards. I'll explain that in the next slide. Then there's also at the junior school science area, in that area, a great deal of focus on observation, which means touching, feeling, smelling, seeing things, your whole skill of observation. So the whole point is to heighten your ability to look at the world and ourselves and grow in self-awareness. So the point of general studies is to see, to understand for ourselves that the outer is a mirror of the inner. So when we see the tremendous exploitation and degradation of environment, how does it mirror our own attitude towards the environment, our own utilitarian way of looking at nature, at trees, at the so-called natural resources? The very term resources in some ways degrading to nature. Then the phenomenon of authoritarian governments which are spreading all across the world, it comes from within. Can we understand our own authoritarian tendencies? Can we understand from where fundamentalism springs, nationalism, the idea of echo chambers and all opinion circles? Where do all these things come from? Our own need for entertainment and our opinions constantly reinforced. So this outer mirroring the inner and the inner being representative, you can say, of the outer is a very important notion. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation. What are students' responses like? Well, it's a mixed bag. Typically, you'll find when you talk about all these things, you have very animated discussions. Lots of people participate with a lot of energy. Some of them are very eager learners. They're eager to converse with you about these things. They see the connections between the mess outside and the conflicts within, and how one is a mirror of the other. You also find a few children cheating in quotes, by saying what they think the teacher wants to hear. So they are playing to the gallery, you might say. Also, there are children who find it difficult to connect with some of these issues when it becomes a discussion-oriented class. Perhaps they are late bloomers, they are not able to easily connect with discussion. So you find all kinds. But the thing is, it's a continuous challenge. For example, whenever you talk of environmental problems or problems of authoritarian government, mental misuse or consumerism, they quickly want to get involved with activist kind of activity. So the real challenge is not to say no to that, but to take the inquiry inwards and to see oneself, because as is written out here, the last line, you are the world, and to actually see that the problem is not just out there, some bad fellows there, and let's just get rid of those bad fellows and everything will be solved. That whole idea is there in lots of people's minds, but to really understand that the problem stems from within is a very difficult idea. And also part of the challenge is strong opinions. When you talk about these things, you meet very strong opinions, and the challenge is also for the teacher, because they bring out the same opinions inside you. You will find yourself getting impatient, feeling in conflict, and taking sides. It's a great challenge for us. So in this short presentation, there are so many issues which I have not touched on, which need to be talked about in these classes. What is our attitude to success and failure? Very important question, because it dominates so much of our thinking. What's our attitude towards talent? If we happen to be talented, what's our relationship to that talent? What's our relationship, our feeling about authority, about power? How do we look at fear and hurt, when fear is something which dominates so much of our lives and shapes so much of our lives? How do we learn through these experiences, through these discussions, to be simple and quiet? How do we learn this all-important thing of not reacting? Can we talk about what goes into reactions? And how so often when we talk about problems, we are quick to divide. We have inherently divisive approach in us, and to learn what constitutes divisiveness and what it means to love the earth as a whole. So I'll just conclude by this last line, that the teacher cannot belong to society, a very subtle and remarkable statement that Krishnamurti made long back. And there's a huge amount in that. And one has to, I think, spend half a life trying to understand what that means, that a teacher cannot belong to society. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shailesh ji. That was a wonderful presentation. I really liked the emphasis that you have placed on Krishnamurti's educational philosophy and how it operates in the schools. I had the chance of spending 3 months at Brockwood Park School at one point. I studied the system there. And the points that you have shared are closely connected to what happens at Brockwood Park School. You said a lot of things, but a couple of things I would like to emphasize for the listeners. I think one thing, the point about the psychological evolution in the future of humanity, Bohm and Krishnamurti discuss this point very deeply, that we think that human beings have advanced a lot, but that advancement is only in the sphere of the outward life. So in terms of technological production, in terms of scientific progress, we have advanced a lot. But when it comes to the inner feelings, which cause a lot of problem in the world, whether it is hatred or fear or insecurity or anxiety or unhappiness, I don't think we have dealt with that properly. So for those of you who are new to Krishnamurti or would like to understand, that is his key focus. So no problem, no issue with the outward advancement and growth, but unless we also see who we are inwardly, that outward growth can be very problematic. The person can develop the atomic bomb and the another person can drop it too. So that means that the only advancement in knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that we have actually grown inwardly or developed inwardly.